Hi everyone, welcome to Dog Sunday School, 1st of February 2026. So what I want to do today really is I want to get sort of back on track, if you like, and I'm going to revert back to that part of that induction that I used to go through. What I will do is I'll share a still of what's on the flip chart in the comments attached to this video, so you can have a little look if you like. But the way this induction used to be set up was a series of questions really that were really prompts for me to make sure I discuss certain aspects. So some of it's actually not relevant because we're obviously in the office here and some of the points were sort of environmentally linked, if you like, to the venue that we were running out of. But there's a particular question on here that I used to pose to all new students. And I actually even pose it as well to most one-to-one clients that I work with as well. So I thought it would be a good place to start, really. And it's one of these things that's quite often overlooked. And it's the question of, what do I teach first? If I'm working with a new dog, raising a new puppy, what generally, if I'm not working on behavioural, unwanted behaviour and trying to correct that, what do I generally recommend that people teach a new puppy or a new dog that they're trying to develop first? And it's one of the foundational stones, if you like, of all dog training, in my opinion. And I'm going to answer the question for you rather than keep you hanging. Okay. So the first thing that I recommend, and I teach any of my dogs, is that it pays to pay attention. And that's why if you look at my logo, you look at the sign behind me here, you'll find it's my tagline. It pays to pay attention. And the reason for that is because once I've taught the dog that it pays to pay attention, then I can actually teach them to pay attention. And how I teach them to pay attention is through a response to name. Now, sadly, that response to name, although it's again one of the first foundational building blocks that we can set in place, is generally one of the first things that gets devalued. It gets spoilt. So let's just think about that for a moment. So we take the time to teach our dogs that it pays to pay attention, and we can do that non-verbally. We can teach that through our body language. Of course, we can quite often use food to teach that. We can teach it through our actions and through the consequence of the dog paying attention to us. And we don't need to use a verbal instruction at that point. However, it's one of the first verbal instructions that we're going to teach our dog, is generally their name. And this is the point of using the dog's name. You see, the dog doesn't need a name for its identity, unlike we do. The dog doesn't own its name the same way as we do. And whilst I appreciate the dog's name is important to us, it conjures up the dog, their persona, their personality, just like a favourite teacher or maybe that, relative or friend that you don't really like. But for the dog, its name should be a verbal instruction, or cue if you prefer, to give us their attention. And it's generally one of the first things we teach. But as I've said before, it's often one of the first things as well that we either devalue or somehow we poison it. So what do I mean? Well, we simply devalue it by allowing the dog to believe that it no longer pays to pay attention to that name. Yeah? We overuse the name. Our family members, children, grandchildren, neighbours, people we meet in the street, use the dog's name to gain its attention and then don't reward it. Quite quickly, the dog learns, you're just like the boy that cried wolf. You keep asking for my attention, but then you're not rewarding me when I give it. And you're not actually asking me to perform a particular behaviour or action that may lead to that reward. So quite often, what happens is the dog starts to zone out. It doesn't mean anything anymore. And this is why we have to guard that. That, what I call response to name, is very, very valuable, and we should guard it. We should protect it. Now, what do I mean by poisoning? Well, quite simply that. If you start using the dog's name in a corrective tone, you use the dog's name the same way as you would with your children to mean 1,000 different things, including stop that now, or don't do that, or I'm not happy with you, and you allow that vocal inflection into it when you use and present the dog's name to it, you can quite quickly change the dog's positive association to their name to one of a negative. And so what you've actually done now is you've poisoned that instruction, that cue. And then don't be surprised when your dog doesn't want to pay attention to it. Because what's happening now is that vocal inflection is predicting to the dog that an unpleasant consequence is going to come. That frowning face, that slight body pressure, or spatial pressure. It can be a million different things. But we can actually, in effect, very easily poison probably the most important instruction that we can ever teach our dog. So this is why I guard it. I don't particularly like to tell total strangers my dog's name because it is a verbal cue or instruction to pay attention to me. Another thing I don't like to do is use the name as a recall. Now, there is a couple of important reasons for this, but I haven't got time to go into those today. But I prefer a recall cue to be very, very clear. Whilst I may use the dog's name to gain its attention initially, so then it is paying attention to me and it's waiting for that further instruction or cue to what I want it to do, I don't actually use the name as the actual recall cue itself. All I want it simply to do is to gain the dog's attention. So it's either listening to me or it's looking at me and it's waiting in anticipation for what I'm going to either ask it or tell it to do next, which will inevitably lead to a reward. But of course, there's another reason that the dog may well choose to pay attention to its name, and that is if paying attention to its name allows it then to hear a verbal marker or signal that can mean that it can avoid an unpleasant consequence for unwanted behaviour. Okay? So what's one of the first things I would advocate teaching your dog is that it pays to pay attention. I'm going to continue to rehearse that, if you like. I'm just trying to find the right word for that, forgive me. But I'm going to continue reinforcing that for the whole time that I have a relationship or I live with my dogs. It pays to pay attention for all the right reasons, generally. Cheers now. Bye-bye.